Okay, Dave, if you'd like to go ahead and get started. And once again, what was your preference, Dave? Was it to speak, have people speak out, ask questions after a section or as the questions come up?
Yeah, I think we could start out just as they come up. And if I see that we're running short on time, maybe I'll try to get through certain sections and then, stop, pause for questions.
Awesome.
Okay.
If that works for you all.
Thanks, Dave.
Yep.
So if everybody else could be on mute when we do this. Thank you.
And can you all see the screen, the presentation? Yes. Okay, very good. Okay, so here's a short disclaimer. The main thing is that that laws can vary from state to state. Of course, there's nationwide laws, there's Dodd-Frank and different things, but also from state to state, it can vary. So here are a few topics that we're going to cover. What is a wraparound mortgage? Investing actively versus investing passively. Dodd-Frank and other risks with these wrap mortgages. Rental versus note comparison. And advanced strategies on owner finance notes. So let's get started with what a wrap mortgage is. It's a mortgage in a form of a secondary financing. Sorry, I can't, let me move this around. Okay, that's better. Okay. In which the seller extends to a buyer a junior mortgage, which wraps around the existing mortgage. And so as an example, what that means is, this is an example. Let's say you buy a property with owner financing, and let's say the purchase price is $100,000, and you buy the property, you put $10,000 down, and then that seller has a $90,000 mortgage. In this example, 5% interest with a 30-year amortization and a monthly payment of $483.14 a month. All right, so a lot of people, of course, investors may do this and go and rent the property out. They may fix it up and flip it. But in this case, what you're going to do with a wrap, you sell the property for $150,000 with 15 down and extend a wraparound mortgage for $135,000, a 30-year amortization, 8% interest, and the payments of $990.58. So if you go back to how much you're paying out versus how much is coming in, so you have $990.58 coming in a month and $483.14 going out a month, which produces a cash flow of $507.44. So the difference between, of course, a lot of people are familiar with owner finance. You buy with owner financing, and let's say you rent it out for $990 or $1,000 a month. The main difference is that when it's a note, they own the property. You don't own the property. They own the property, and you have a second position mortgage that wraps around that first position, that $90,000. And then the difference between the $990 and the $483 is a clean, what I think of as clean cash flow. You don't have to pay taxes, insurance, repairs, maintenance. There's nothing that comes out of that because the owner, which is your borrower, owns that property and, of course, maintains that property. Does that make sense? So, I forgot y'all can't. Okay, it's everybody's on mute, right? Yeah. So
Dave, tell us just a few seconds, because we didn't read your bio. Give us a few sentences on, like, a little bit about yourself and how you got started doing this, and
okay,
then
sure.
Deep dive into this, because sometimes we like to hear the story behind the process, because
right.
You're just real people, right, doing this, so it inspires us.
Right. Yep. Yeah. So I started out in real estate. Well, back in 2005, I read Robert Kiyosaki's book, Rich Dad Poor Dad, and I always liked the concept of cash flow. I didn't start in real estate. I was an insurance agent for a long time, 15 years, and In 2015, I really started digging into real estate and bought my first deal in 2016. And my plan was to get a rental portfolio, probably a combination of single family and multifamily, and within a 10 or 15-year period, have enough cash flow to leave the insurance business. So I bought the first property in 2016. In 2017, I saw this this YouTube video about this wrap around mortgage, and I absolutely love the concept. And I had my first rental that was bringing in $615 a month, I think it was, and I was paying out a mortgage of approximately $350. And I thought I had a 200 and, what would that be, $265 cash flow, maybe a little bit less for tax and insurance. And then I got hit with the tax bill, the insurance bill, and some repairs, and I was about break even. Of course, there was some appreciation, things like that. But once I learned about the wrap, I did my first wrap. They were paying me $700 some a month, and I was paying $300 some a month, and it was a clean $400 and some cash flow. And once I understood that concept, within a year and a half, my income from real estate surpassed my insurance income, which was pretty good. And I was able to go full-time real estate. And so it sped up the process from 15 years to a year and a half. So, that's why, notes for me are extremely powerful, and especially I especially like the strategy. So, back to this. This is one example. There's different ways of doing wraps, but this is one example where you are buying with owner financing, and you're buying just from the person that's selling it. They're financing it to you, and then you're turning around and creating a spread, an arbitrage between the first position mortgage and the second position mortgage, the wraparound mortgage. So,
Dave, is this possible with a bank financed property? So if you went out and bought a home with, say Chase Bank, you have a Chase Bank mortgage, could you do a wraparound on that property?
Yeah, I think you absolutely could. The risk, there is a little bit of a risk, because that end buyer that you're selling it to is buying the property subject to your existing mortgage. So banks do have that due on sell clause. Whereas when I buy with owner financing or with private money, I have them state that they will not call the loan due if I resell the property with owner financing. Whereas if you're buying with bank financing, they're going to have that due on sell clause. There are ways around it, such as putting it in a trust and then assigning the beneficial interest, but it's, there's ways to do it. And then a second way of doing it would be a land contract or a contract for deed, in which you set up an installment sale, and the deed stays in your name. So you don't transfer the deed, it stays in your name, and then you transfer the deed once it's paid off. But yeah, so there is definitely ways of doing that. And also, if you're familiar with the subject to process in general, instead of buying with owner financing, you can buy with subject to the existing mortgage, and then turn around and sell with a wrap. There's some risks involved, and you really want to know what you're doing when you're doing that, and talk to your attorney.
Just FYI, Dave, Young asked, is the person that the title is the end buyer? I think you.
Yeah. So there's two ways of doing it. If you, with a true wraparound mortgage, let's say, you Phil, you sell me your property owner finance, and then I sell it to you, Melanie, and I transfer the deed to you, Melanie, and so you actually have the deed, and I have a note in mortgage or note in deed of trust. That's the probably more common way of doing it, and it varies from state to state which way is better. But the other way of doing it is with the contract for deed, or the land contract, in which I buy it from you, Phil, and then I hold the deed, but I set up that contract for deed or land contract with you, Melanie, and once you pay me off, then I transfer the deed. So it can be done both ways. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Yep. Okay, another example is that, let's say you purchase a home with private money. And this is more like what you were talking about, Phil, except I just use a private money example. So I purchase a home, let's say I purchase a home for $70,000 and needs $30,000 in rehab. I have a passive investor that lends $90,000, which covers the purchase of the property and covers part of the rehab. And so the passive investor holds a first position note and mortgage of $90,000, just like any, if I was doing a flip or a rental, just like any other private money lender would do. They have a $90,000 mortgage, let's say 6% interest, 30-year AM with a balloon or without a balloon. And then the payment to that private money investor is $539.60. Then I take the home and sell it for $115 with 15 down and $135,000 note with 8% interest and a 30-year AM. Payments are $990, like our previous example. The cash flow is $450.98. So in this case, of course, it's great to be able to purchase a property with owner financing when the seller is willing to owner financing, but we know a lot of times they're not willing, and probably the majority of the time, depending on how good you are with negotiation, a lot of times it's great to be able to buy it cash or using private money. Of course, that's a type of cash. So you pay that seller their $70,000 and you have a little bit extra for rehab, and then, or not, you don't have to necessarily rehab the property. And then you wrap that private money mortgage with your secondary wrap mortgage. And it creates the arbitrage of $450. Any questions on that?
So Dave, do you have to make sure that the timing for the wrap equals the original mortgage or is longer, or can the wrap actually be at a shorter time frame versus the original mortgage?
You can do it either way. Of course, it depends on I would say your risk tolerance and your, how financially stable are you. So let's say, you Phil lend to me as a private money investor with a 5-year balloon. And then generally I'd like to, have it where there's either, I can call the note due, or there's a balloon that's before that, but you don't necessarily have to. I know my mentor, Mitch Stephen, he does them all the time, where he has a 5-year balloon on his underlying mortgage, and then he does it for 30 years. And what he does is he just knows that he can replace that underlying mortgage with another private money lender or with bank financing. Now you can't do it with another mortgage, but there's other ways of doing it. Later on, I'm going to talk about the advanced strategies on how to replace that money. But you definitely can. You don't have to have it matched necessarily, but you just have to be very cautious that you don't put that end buyer in a risky situation that they're going to lose their money because of your mistake, because you can't replace the money. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So both liens are on the title. Is that correct? Both the original
Yes.
first lien and then the wraparound, which would be the second lien.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yep, no problem. Yeah, so I want to get into the two different areas that you can be involved with a wrap mortgage. The active investor, which is the main one that's running the business, that's actually doing the wrap. What the active investor does, he has a very high return A lot of times I'm out of pocket very little, and then I get a down payment and I get my money right back, or sometimes even put money in my pocket. And then, so it's, you know, a lot of times it can be an infinite return. But you are actively running a business. You're finding the home, you're selling the home, you're qualifying the buyer, you're dealing with the RMLO, which is a residential mortgage loan originator. You're dealing with Dodd-Frank, which, you know, sets, I'm going to get into more detail with Dodd-Frank, but there's a lot that goes on with the business. So generally, the business will have an acquisition department. Now, in the beginning, of course, that all these departments can be you, but depending on how well you want to, how well you structure your business, you have an acquisition department, maybe the acquisition manager, a funding department, a rehab department, a sales department, and an admin department. Currently, that's what, you know, that's my setup, and so it's really running a business. I'm very active in the business. You're working with borrowers, you're conducting foreclosures, cash for keys. So if one of my buyers stops paying, currently I have somebody that is very behind, and he's been consistently behind, and unfortunately he's not going to be able to stay in the property. We generally can work something out, cash for keys, where we give them some money to move on, and they do a deed in lieu of foreclosure, or sometimes we have to foreclose. So me as an active investor, I'm the one that would do that, or my business would do that. And so there's greater risk, but there's higher returns. And I would say the active investor needs a lot higher level of knowledge and energy. Now, once the business is built, it can be pretty passive. And so the properties that you currently have, if you already have them set up with a servicing company and they're paying you, it doesn't take a whole lot of energy to keep that running. There will be, you know, some ongoing things that you have to deal with, but it's mainly when you're growing the business and you're purchasing the properties, you're rehabbing the properties, you're finding the buyers, and sometimes you can purchase, and a lot of times I'll sell as is, and I won't rehab a property. That's one of the nice things about owner financing, is you don't have to. But the main thing is that the active investor is going to be very active in running a business, whereas a passive investor, I look for partners, what I call them silent partners. They're going to put up the majority of the financing. They can invest with very little energy and very low risk. So a lot of my investors don't have any experience, or they have very little experience in real estate, and they maybe have never, you know, rehabbed a property, never purchased a property themselves except their primary residence, or maybe they've been in the business and they don't want to be active anymore, and they just want their money to work for them. But it's low energy and low risk, the passive investor. So they don't have to acquire, they don't have to deal with Dodd-Frank, just because they are lending to a LLC, which is my company, the LLC, and Dodd-Frank has to do with somebody that actually lives in the home. So the primary activity of a passive investor would be to find an experienced and ethical investor that's financially strong, and also they want to verify that the ARV, the after repair value, is very solid. So in other words, if going back to that example of $90,000, let me go ahead and flip to the next screen real quick. $90,000. This is the dark green. You know, that's the passive investor. They put up the majority of the money to purchase the property, and they receive a return, and they have a note and mortgage, a first position note and mortgage. And the property, if you remember, is worth 150. So that's their collateral. They're not in for nearly as much as what the collateral is worth. So that's their protection. If the investor stops paying, the active investor or the end buyer stops paying, it's backed by this mortgage, and they get a property that's worth a lot more than what they have invested. Even in a down economy, to drop from 150 below 90 is very rare. So that's what makes them very safe. And usually they're not in for more than 75%. I usually don't ask for anything over 70% of the value. So again, to make math easy, if a home is worth 100,000, I don't ever look for money more than 70,000. So 70,000 or less to purchase and rehab the property. And I want to make sure that my passive investor stays safe. So generally, now, of course, everything is negotiable, but somewhere a return of 5 to 8% is a general return for a passive investor. And in my opinion, of course, there's lending to flips. You can lend to a flipper, you can lend to a landlord. But because, especially if somebody doesn't have experience in flipping, I think the lender, in my opinion, is at more risk. Usually they have a better return because there's points and different things, but there's a lot more flips if the economy takes a dive. It's a lot easier to get stuck with a property. Or if, like a friend of mine was doing a flip and he paid the contractor his first draw of $20,000, and then the contractor didn't show up, and so that was his first $20,000 loss, and he actually lost money on that property. And so later I'm going to get into the details about why owner financing notes it can be a very solid and very safe investment for both parties.
Hey, Dave.
So again, go ahead. Somebody have a question?
So, yeah, this is Phil. I think with this illustration, it's really quite good illustrating the mortgage. But going back to like your 150 example, where 90,000 is the first, 135 is the second lien, and 150 is the value. I think as an active investor, if the person who's purchased the house at 135, if they choose not to pay, then I think as an active investor, you have to be active at either replacing them and covering the payments in between, or because if you go to foreclosure, the 90 will clear first, right? And then you've got your exposure between 90 and 135, right, because you have a second.
Right. Yep. That's right. And honestly, 9 times out of 10, or maybe 19 times out of 20, we're able to work out a cash for keys, and so they just deed it back. But you are right. I mean, what we do is when we have somebody stop paying and we have to work out a cash for keys or even a foreclosure, and that varies from state to state on whether everybody's paid off or not, or if it's deeded back. So if you work out a cash for keys and we put a new buyer, my passive investor is never going to not get paid. So I guarantee, as an active investor, I guarantee that my passive investor gets paid like clockwork, no matter what happens with the end buyer. So that way they don't have to worry about it. I don't, if my end buyer stops paying me, I don't stop paying my investor. And because this is an actual lien on the property, it's not dependent on, it's a little bit different from the passive investors that you think of, for example, in multifamily, that the return is determined by how well the property produces. The active investor, at least the way I set it up, the passive investor or the lender has a set interest rate that they're going to get no matter what. And if I don't pay that, they get the property. So now I've never not paid it, just because if you have a lot of properties, if 1 or 2 go vacant, then I have a lot of other properties paying in. And also, now the beautiful thing about notes, different from rentals, when you have a vacancy, is that when you get a new buyer, you get a new down payment. So I don't even, take really vacancy into consideration in terms of my numbers, just because I never want it to happen. We always try to work with our end buyers, but when it does happen, there may be a few months that you don't get paid, and then once you get a new buyer in there, you get another 10 or 15 or 20 down. So it stores you, and usually the property is appreciated and you can sell it for even more. Does that make sense? So, like, back to your point, that passive investor, the way we always set it up is that passive investor is going to get paid like clockwork, no matter what happens to that end buyer.
Thanks.
Yep. Okay, so Dodd-Frank and risk to be aware of. Again, this is mainly this would mainly be with the active investor, because now, of course, you can definitely turn around and owner finance it to another investor and do a wrap. But a lot of times, because we can get, another investor is going to want a big discount, so we end up owner financing more to end buyers that are going to live in the home. And when you do that, that's when you're dealing with Dodd-Frank. So, and this is the reason why most lenders, they want to avoid owner occupants. I know plenty of lenders that lend to investors, but they won't touch a property that they're lending to somebody living in the property, just because they don't want to deal with Dodd-Frank. And Dodd-Frank, in a nutshell, what it is that it's the laws that protect the consumer, to make sure that their debt to income is that they have the ability to pay. And so before you owner finance the property, you don't want to just owner finance the property. If the person's going to live in the property, you want to go through the process of their debt to income. And we use what's called a residential mortgage loan originator that's going to look at their income, their tax returns, and then look at how much other debt they may have and make sure that the debt to income is okay. And you may have to turn some down if they don't have enough income. So that's an extremely important part, because if you don't do that, you can definitely get in a lot of trouble, or you can, if they end up not paying, it can be very, very difficult to get them out if you didn't qualify them according to Dodd-Frank. That's an important point. Does anybody have any? I'm not a Dodd-Frank expert, but does anybody have any questions about that? And has everybody heard of Dodd-Frank? Most people heard of Dodd-Frank. I would think so, being in the notes world, right? Okay, so some of the other things you want to watch out for. We always use a servicing company. You don't have to. I have had a partner that I didn't use a servicing. We actually had our own servicing company, but if you make a mistake with amortization, or you don't send the 1098 forms, it's not a good place to be in. And so we always recommend using a residential mortgage loan originator to originate that loan, and also use a servicing company. I know you mentioned Shante Duffy. I know her as well, and so she's actually helped service some of our notes. And it's something that keeps you safe. It takes a lot off your plate also, because you're not dealing directly with that borrower, that end buyer, but the servicing company is. So
just a note on that, Dave, and we'll be
Sure.
hearing more from Shantae, but the CFPB has Consumer Finance Protection Bureau has really strict rules on what you can say to a borrower, when you can call them, when you can, when you can ask certain questions. So that's why the servicers are trained and licensed. And so to do this, to take this on as a side hustle to save $30 a month is really not recommended. So
yeah, I agree. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, so I want to do a comparison between notes and rentals, and I'm doing a comparison with single family homes just to make it simple. And so let's say you have a rental property that you have $1,000 a month rent, and you want to figure out exactly how much you're actually earning. So $1,000 a month rent. Let's say you have an 8% property management fee. A lot of times it can be 10%, but in this scenario, 8% property management fee, which is $80, and you have $100 a month in taxes, $60 a month in insurance, $75 a month in maintenance reserves that you put aside, $50 in vacancy. And so this is just money you put aside for when you do have vacancy or maintenance, and you're left with net operating income of $635. Does that make sense? So after all expenses paid, you have $100,000, I'm sorry, $1,000 coming in, and you have your expenses that leaves $635. And let's say you have a mortgage of $500 a month, and so your actual cash flow is $135 a month. So if you multiply that times 10, you have $10,000 a month in gross rents, but you have 6,350 in net operating income and a debt service of $5,000 and a cash flow of $1,350. So now if you compare that to a note that is $1,000 a month note, there's no property, that's not property management, because it's ran through a servicing company, zero taxes, zero insurance, zero maintenance, zero vacancies. I put zero vacancies just because of the down payment that you get. So your net operating income is $1,000. Now, on neither one of the example, I'm not considering there may be admin fees if you have a company that owns a lot of properties that you pay office manager or whatever. But so I'm looking just at the property, but it's $1,000 a month net operating income. You have a $500 mortgage, so you actually have a $500 cash flow. So multiplying this by 10, you have $10,000 coming in and $5,000 going out with a cash flow of $5,000. So if you look at the difference between $1,350 and $5,000, there's a big difference between the two, just because the $5,000 is a clean cash flow. And the reason why all these numbers are zero is because you don't own the property. Your buyer or your borrower owns the property, and they take care of the tax, they take care of the insurance, they take care of the maintenance, and that's why you have a clean cash flow. Now, the other important thing is if you look at the ratios of debt to income, you have your income with a rent of $6,350 and $5,000 going out for mortgages versus $10,000 and $5,000 going out. So if you have these 10 properties, it would take literally 50% vacancy to break even. So this is really the power that I see in the owner finance notes. Now, of course, over time, the advantage of the mortgage, of a rental property is that rents do go up from year to year. So that's one of the main advantages, and that's why I still always like to have the rentals in my portfolio, because over time they do go up in value. So if you look at over time, if this is income, if you have $1,000 a month again with no income, that's going to stay the same, right? Whereas a rental is going to go up. So if you remember in this example, you had $1,000 net operating income, and then with the rental you had 600, I think it was 615 or 635 one. But over time, as the rents move up, eventually that $500 cash flow will be, the rental will catch up, and then eventually it will pass it if you continue to hold the property. So in my experience, it usually takes somewhere between 10 and 15 years for the rental to cash flow what a note would cash flow. But eventually it will pass that and go over time. But I think one of the important things to consider is it better to have more cash flow now or more cash flow later? And what a lot of people think is I would rather have more, I want to delay gratification and have more cash flow later, right? But you can't invest what you don't have. So you can't invest the returns on the money that hasn't come to you yet. So this is out in the future. Whereas if you have more money coming in now, and in the next 10 or 15 years, you can turn around and reinvest that money. And that's really how what the time value of money, that's what it's all about, is that if you can get more cash flow now, you can turn around and reinvest that money and grow your money faster. And so notes can multiply, and to me, they can multiply very well and faster than what rentals can. But that being said, I love the fact that rentals do go up from year to year. Every year they're going up in value, as well as the appreciation aspect of rentals. So again, the time value of money comparison. Go ahead.
Just if you go back for just a second,
Sure.
I think the other piece about the note versus the rental on the upfront piece, remember, you can always sell a note and get your capital back. And the earlier you sell it, the higher the percentage of the original money that you put down. Because early on in a note, most of the payments are interest, not principal.
Right.
That's also supports what you're saying, and I think should be considered.
And you can, of course, you can sell a rental property as well. So, yeah. And I think in general, of course, if you do sell a note, you have a higher return, but then you have to use the energy to go reinvest that. So in general, the higher the return, the more energy it takes. Just like, because if you think about it, flipping, if I bought a property for 70,000, sold it for 100,000, the return on that is excellent, but I'm running a business. It's very active. Whereas I think notes are actually, what I love about them is they're actually lower. To me, they're a better return on energy than a rental property because you don't own it. You're just the bank. And at the same time, they're producing more cash flow. So they have, it's like a double advantage that they have that I really like. And for cash flow, I mean, for building up cash flow, if you just think about it, if you have 20 rental properties earning, 100 to 150 a month, it's going to take a long time. Let's say you have a goal of $10,000 a month passive income to retire, to quit your job. It's going to take a long time for those 20 properties to build up to enough cash flow. Whereas with notes, if it's $500 a pop per month, with 20 notes, 20 owner finance notes, you're there. So does that make sense? Yeah. So that what you're referring? Go ahead. Yeah, and one of the slides I'm going to talk about.
Hey, Dave, there was a question in the chat from Young. What if someone refinances and wants to satisfy the mortgage? If you have an underlying mortgage, you only get what that spread is then, correct? That's right.
So, I would say that would be one of the disadvantages of a note versus a rental, is that you don't really control if somebody refinances or sells the property. If they, in that example, 135, let's say they owe you 120 and you owe 80, you're going to get the $40,000 and then the note's done. The underlying mortgage is paid off and you're paid off, and you reinvest that money. So sort of like if you could sell a note or if they refinance or sell the property, then you get paid off. I like to put this example in there, the time value of money. If you remember the $1,000 note example.
I'm sorry, Dave, just one last thing. We're 10 minutes to the end, so.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, I'll try to speed up just a little bit, but the time value of money, if you think that $1,000 a month it is $1,000. So in the last example, you'll see I drew a flat line, but really what's happening is that $1,000 a month now is not going to be what it is in 10 or 15 years from now. So really, in a note, the disadvantage of the note again is that the cash flow is really going down. Even though it's staying the same for a dollar figure, but the value is going down. And a rental is going up as in terms of numbers, but in terms of actual value, usually it's following the market, so it's staying flat. Now appreciation comparison, a note, of course, as it pays down, what you were talking about, Phil, in the beginning, it's mostly interest, and then over time it starts going down faster and faster because the principal is paid down. Whereas a rental steadily increases. So that would be a plus for the rental, is that that appreciation is going to go up over time. Okay, so liquidity comparison. I really like this comparison just because if you have a seasoned note and it's structured right, you can usually sell it at 95 to 100%. Now, of course, if you're a savvy note buyer, you're going to want more of a discount. But from what I've experienced, I've been able to sell notes with a good return to that buyer at close to 100% on the value. Whereas a rental, with the note, a lot of times I can sell that within weeks. Whereas a rental, if you have a contract and there's 6 months left, you have to wait to the end of that 6 months. And a lot of times you have to fix up the property, put it on the market. So it takes a very long time to sell a rental in most cases. You can of course sell it to another investor, but with the note, that borrower stays in the property. They don't have to leave the property, and it's a lot of times very quick to sell. And so to me, notes have been a way that it's very liquid. You can sell a partial, you can sell the whole thing. You can take a group of them if you need to raise money. Maybe you want to buy, put your money into apartment complex, multifamily, right? You can put together 10 notes or 20 notes or whatever and sell them, liquidate them, and put that money into other, or if you have a financial need or whatever, they're a pretty liquid asset. The vacancy comparison, like I talked about before, when you have a vacancy with a rental, of course there is that deposit, but besides the deposit, if you go a month, 2 months, 3 months of no income, you lose money. Whereas with a note, if you have somebody leave the property, or if they stop paying, it may be even longer than the rental that it takes to get a new person back in, but you get a new down payment. So that's why, you actually a lot of times come out better than you would with a rental. Okay, so and this is the last section. What you were referring to in the very beginning when you talked about if you have a balloon on the underlying mortgage, and we talked about replacing that underlying mortgage. So you can hypothecate a note, which basically means, what it means is that you pledge that note as collateral to borrow against it. So a little bit different from when you have a property and you refinance the property, you actually have a new lien on that property, and it's a new lien, a new note mortgage from the bank or from the other lender. Whereas in this case, you don't have a new lien on that property, it's a lien against the note. And so if you were to do a title search, you wouldn't see a new mortgage on that property. And this is a very important aspect. Once you get, if you're going to build this as a business, and you do have those underlying mortgages, that you may start out, I know Mitch Stephen, what he does is he will buy a bunch of properties. He purchases 100 a year, and so he may buy 25 and a quarter, and he's using private money, and then he goes to the bank and takes 25 notes and pledges those 25 notes as collateral. Let's say that's 2.5 million, and he'll take out a loan for, let's say, 1.5 or 1.7 million, and he'll pay all of his private money investors out, and then that end buyer no longer there's no underlying mortgage anymore, just because if you stop paying as a borrower, they don't get the property, they get the note. Does that make sense? So I know this is a little bit more complicated, but it's a very important part of this note business, to be able to pledge a note as collateral and borrow against it. And it can be a very powerful tool. Now, the other thing we talked about selling the notes. If you want to liquidate, if you structure your note right, it can be very easy to liquidate the whole note or a partial. Now, partial, what it is, if there's, let's say there's, 20 years left on the note, 240 payments left. You can sell the 240 payments, or you can sell 140. You can sell part of it. If you want to liquidate part of the note and pull out some cash, but then you still own the back end of that note, that's another way of selling the note and pulling out some cash. And so what I actually a lot of times do, I have a private, let's say a private money investor or more passive investor that would love to buy the whole note, but they're afraid of dealing with the end buyer. I can sell a partial. I can even sell everything except the last few years of the note, and write into the contract and say if the note ever goes bad, that I pay off my lender. They don't have to deal with. I'm sorry, not the lender, but the note buyer that bought the first part of that note. Pay them off, or I can put in a new buyer if I work out cash for keys and the note continues, and they don't have to deal with that end buyer. And that's a very attractive feature to a more passive investor. And for me, I can keep a new down payment and have the back end of that note, or pay off the note, the investor that bought the first part of the note. I can pay them off and then create a new note for that property. So that's the last section right there. I just want to I cover, especially because we're running out of time. I flew through the slides pretty fast, but any questions that you all have about any section of this the presentation?
So if we could have people just unmute themselves and ask.
Sorry, my son just came in. It's bedtime, wants to be tucked in.
If you guys could unmute yourselves and ask the questions, that'd be great. Thank you.
Looks like Michael's asking if the presentation would be available, the slides.
Yeah, I mean, is it possible to get the presentation?
Sure, I could email it to you, Phil, and you.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine.
I appreciate it. It was good information.
Yeah, appreciate it. Yep. And I'm not I don't have any type of coaching program or anything like that. But of course, I'm always doing deals. So if anybody has interest in doing deals, feel free to contact me.
Do you also have a website?
I have an owner financing website. I put my properties on that. I wonder if I can. I don't know if I can.
Is it the kahlproperties.com?
No, it's not. Oh.
So Dave, I heard a new term today, clean cash flow. I have never heard that before. I'm glad you brought up time value of money, especially during inflation these days. The other thing you mentioned, your mentor, Mitch Stevens, I think that's an important note because there's a lot of resources to keep learning about notes. And I love the rental and the note comparison. That was fabulous. So thank you so much. It's, I feel like we could sit around and talk for another hour. But I really appreciate you sharing your gleaning wisdom from all your, you're scaling your business in, a short amount of time. So thanks a lot for everybody attending. And I look forward to, if you guys can think of other topics you would like to cover around, this seemed to be a very popular topic today. So if you have other ideas of topics, just put those in the chat or send us a private email at noteworthydeal@gmail.com.
Thanks so much, David.
Yeah, thank you.
Very enlightening. I learned more. I learn more all the time, but it was very, very well presented, and I didn't know a lot about reps, so it was good. I look forward to watching the video later.
Yeah, very good.
Thanks, Phil and Melanie. Appreciate it.
Sure.
Yeah, good to meet you all.
You too. Thanks.
Thanks, David.
Thank you.
Okay. I guess with that, we'll go ahead and end our thing for tonight, and we'll look forward to seeing everyone next month. Thank you.
All right.
Thanks.
All right. Thank you.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.